Welcome to the end of Unit 3 Retake Review video, Part 2. I'll be doing completing the square, quadratic formula, and inequalities. So, for completing the square, this is where you get just the x's on the same side. So I'm going to subtract that 18 to the other side. Notice how I left a gap in its place. That is very much on purpose. The whole point of completing the square is to set up the problem on this side so that it's x plus something squared, and then it can be solved just like these. So the whole idea is to try and make it work like these, because they can't be factored, and to some people this is easier than quadratic formula. I'm not saying that has to be true for everyone. Now, remember that this number is in really both parentheses. We're just writing it squared instead, kind of like this one, where you multiplied it by itself. So those two numbers have to add to this one, but they have to be the same number. So like 2 plus 2 is 4, 3 plus 3 is 6. In this case, 5 plus 5 is 10, but I actually want it to be negative 5 plus negative 5 to make negative 10. The reason why we left a gap here is because this number has to be this number times itself, because the numbers in the parentheses add to this number and multiply to this number. That's how factoring works. So this has to be this number squared. Negative 5 times negative 5 is 25. But I'm not allowed to just add a 25 randomly to an equation. If I'm going to add it, I have to add it to both sides. So then the other side becomes negative 18 plus 25, which is 7. And if I'm going to solve this the same way I did this one, the thing being squared is already by itself, so you square root both sides to get rid of the squared. And we have x minus 5 equals, whenever you do a square root, you need a plus minus, and the square root of 7 doesn't exist, and there's nothing that multiplies to 7. So congratulations, you get to just leave it as the square root of 7. Then you add the 5 over. So my final answer is 5 plus or minus the square root of 7. Just make sure the plus and the minus stays on the square root of 7, not the 5. You could also write it as plus or minus the square root of 7 plus 5, if you wanted to write the plus 5 at the end instead of the beginning. Okay, I'm going to do one more, and that leaves the last one for you guys to try by yourself. So I'm going to subtract this 6 over to the other side, leaving behind a gap. And that means that if I make my parentheses squared like this, with x, this number plus itself equals negative 4. 2 plus 2 is 4, so negative 2 plus negative 2 is negative 4. And then this number has to be this number squared. Negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4. Negative 6 plus 4 is negative 2. Then you square root both sides to cancel out the squared, and you get x minus 2 equals plus or minus. There is no square root of 2, so we keep that there, but anytime you do the square root of a negative, you have to put an I. And then you add that 2 on over to the other side, and really, that's your answer right there. Okay. All right, third one's yours to try. I'm going to do quadratic formula on the back side now. Okay, quadratic formula. Opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. I know, my singing voice is really good when I have a cold. Okay, a is the number in front, b is the number in the middle, c is the last number, meaning a is 1, b is negative 8, and c is 25. Plug them in. So negative 8 is going to be positive 8, plus or minus the square root. I'm just going to go ahead and square this as I write it down, guys. Negative 8 squared is 64 minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 25. All over, meaning the whole thing is being divided by 2a. 2 times 1 is 2. There you go. Now, 4 times 1 is 4. 4 times 25 is 100. So we really have 64 minus 100 underneath our square root, which is negative 36. So we have 8 plus or minus the square root of negative 36 over 2. And the square root of negative 36 is, I think we did it on this side, plus or minus 6i. Because the square root of 36 is 6, and anytime you do the square root of a negative, you have to put the I with it. Okay. There, you can divide everything on here by 2 to make it 4 plus or minus 3i. That is an option. Okay. I'm going to do one more lickety split real quick, and then I'll talk about how to do quadratic inequalities. I will briefly cover this, but this is just everything we've done combined. So that's a little redundant to go over that too. Okay, so let's see. A is going to be 1, B is going to be 6, and C is going to be negative 9. So negative B is 6, so that's going to be negative 6, plus or minus the square root. B squared, 6 squared is 36, minus 4 times A, which is 1. Oops, sorry, I wrote 2 1s. Times C, which is negative 9. Now, negative 4 times 1 is negative 4, but negative 4 times negative 9 is positive 36. So I really end up with 36 plus 36 underneath, which means it's going to turn into the square root of 72. Okay, and then 2a is on the bottom. A is 1 again, so 2a is still going to be 2. And then I already know that 72 is 36 times 2. So if I rewrite this as 36 times 2, then I can do the square root of 36, which is 6. So I get negative 6 plus or minus 6 square roots of 2 over 2. Or negative 3 plus or minus 3 square roots of 2. Notice how I did not divide the square root of 2 by 2 because I already divided the number attached to it in front by 2. You can't divide square roots by anything that's not also in a square root. Okay, I'm going to give you a few tips here. Solve a couple of these. Square root method is if you don't have anything in the middle like this. So I can subtract that 49 over to the other side and then divide by 9. And then I can do the square root. Now you might be asking yourself, why didn't she divide them? Because 49 doesn't divide by 9, so I just left it. And then when I do a square root on both sides, don't forget my plus and minus. And then the square root of 49 is 7 over the square root of 9, which is 3. And since it was negative, I'm going to put an I at the end. So you pretty much just get x squared by itself, and then square root both sides. Don't forget your plus minus. Same thing would happen on this one. I would subtract that 72 over to the other side. Divide by 2. Divide by 2. X plus 3 squared equals negative 36. Square root both sides so the squareds cancel out. And that's plus or minus 6i, which that's the third time I've now done the square root of negative 36. So hopefully you paid attention to the other two. And then you subtract the 3 over. You cannot combine those because one of them has an I and the other one doesn't. Okay? If you have something with 3 terms like this, you can try and factor it, meaning you're putting x in both parentheses and looking for 2 numbers that multiply to negative 70 and add to negative 3, which would be negative 10, positive 7. Just make sure you don't forget that this means you're basically solving the equation x minus 10 equals 0. So I would add 10 to both sides, and 0 plus 10 is 10. And then I would solve this one by minusing 7 to both sides. 0 minus 7 is negative 7. And that's factoring for you. Okay, you can factor this one if you want to, but if there's a number in front, you have to make sure that this multiplies to 2x squared like that. Then 1 times 3 is 3, but you can't put the 3 here and the 1 here, because then this makes 2x plus 3x, which is 5x, not 7x. So it has to be 2x plus 1 and x plus 3, because then I get negative 6x plus 1x, which is 7x. If you have no clue what I'm doing there, I already know that this makes 2x squared and that this makes 3. I'm just making sure my outsides and my insides add up to the middle number. This one would be negative 1. I would have to subtract the 1 and then divide by 2. So that's negative 1/2. And for this one, I would just subtract the 3. So that's negative 3. Okay, quadratic inequalities. I'm going to go with middle one on this one. Notice how some of them are greater than, some of them are less than. This one's greater than or equal to. Less than means below or less than. Greater than means above or greater than. So they kind of match. You have to find out when it equals 0 to start with. So I'm going to factor this one, kind of like I did 2 right here. I need 2 numbers that multiply to 10 and add to negative 7. Since they multiply to a positive, they're both going to have to be negative, or they won't add to negative 7. And then 2 times 5 is 10, and negative 2 plus negative 5 is negative 7. So then if this was equal to 0, my 2 answers would be 2 and 5, because I would add 2 to both sides, add 5 to both sides. So if we draw our graph and we imagine it crosses at 2 and 5, which is what zeros are, and we draw our U, since this one is less than, my answer is the parts that are below. So that area, because that's the only part where it dips below the line, from 2 to 5. It doesn't continue over here because that's where it's above. And I'm using brackets because it was less than or equals to. Okay, I'm going to do this one really quick. I would add the 64 to the other side, and I'm going to act like it equals 64 when I do that, because then I'll do this part at the very end. So then I do the square root, x minus 9 equals plus or minus square root of 64 is 8, and then I add my 9. So 8 plus 9 is 17, negative 8 plus 9 is 1. So I've got my number line. 1 and 17 are going to go on it. Here's my U. And since this one is greater than, I want the parts that are above. So that's this area and this area. So everything to the left of negative 1 is negative infinity to 1. Sorry, positive 1. I think I said negative 1. And that is a bracket. and then everything to the right of 7 is 7 to infinity.